Hello, welcome. Thank you for being here. In this video, I wanted to break down what about backwards walking makes it helpful for some forms of knee pain. This has obviously been pretty mainstream for a good couple of years now. I think Ben Patrick, the Knees Are for Toes guy, is primarily responsible for pushing this to the fame that it's achieved. However, I haven't seen anyone break down what actually about backwards walking makes it helpful for, again, some forms of knee pain. Because I think once you understand the underpinning principles behind what is driving the benefit, you can very easily apply them to pain in other body parts, other movements, things like that, which should help make you a bit more independent in terms of self-managing the nagging aches and pains and things like that that are inevitable to come up at some point in time. So again, quick preface, I think when backwards walking gets talked about on the internet, it gets talked about as if it's a sort of panacea to all kinds of knee pain, and knee pain isn't a diagnosis. And knee pain isn't all the same. Knee pain can come from a number of different things. And depending on what's causing the knee pain, backwards walking may help or it may not help. Now, backwards walking is by no means dangerous, really, for anyone. So there is no harm in trying it and seeing what happens. It just may not be the sort of cure-all that is often talked about. And moreover, the people that it does tend to help tend to be the loudest about it having helped them. And I think this is kind of like when you go to see a movie and you love the movie and you tell everyone about the movie and you want everyone you know to watch the movie. It's the same sort of thing. So if you've been in knee pain for 5 years and you finally find something that starts to alleviate that a little bit, you want to tell everyone about it, especially other people who have knee pain. And that sort of amplification of the people that it did help can produce a pretty potent bit of selection bias and make it seem a lot more sort of universally helpful than it might actually be. So again, it's not dangerous per se. There's no usually very likely not going to be any harm in trying it. You just shouldn't be discouraged if you did try it and didn't see all the benefits that people claim it tends to bring. Now, that said, obviously there are a lot of people that backwards walking does tend to help. And recently I sent out a newsletter. If you're not subscribed, you can check that out down below. There's also an archive if you want to see the specific newsletter I'm talking about. But basically what I wrote about in this specific newsletter is that if you have pain with any specific movement, the easiest thing to do first is to take that exact movement and regress it down to a point that's tolerable, and then you just slowly build that back up as your pain allows. So if you think about backwards walking, it's essentially a leg extension, the same thing as a machine leg extension, just regress to pretty much the lowest point it can be regressed to. So one, there's not much weight that your knees themselves have to bear. It's not like there's a weight stack that they're moving on their own. It's a very small range of motion, and that range of motion is not in a very stretched or taut position. It is concentric only. So whenever a muscle contracts, if you imagine a squat, for instance, the down portion where you're lowering the weight in a squat is called the eccentric portion of the rep. The up portion where you're actually lifting the weight and standing up is called the concentric portion of the rep. Eccentric muscle contractions when you're lowering a weight tend to be more intense and require more recovery because they cause more muscle damage than concentric muscle contractions. So because this is concentric only, that itself makes it lower intensity. And then because of these three components right here, lowering the intensity to such a degree, you can place a very high volume of the exercise into the painful part. So essentially, if you imagine that the purpose of exercise is to send a bit of a mechanical signal to an area to tell your body to begin a sort of reparative process in that area, you can send a lot of that signal to the area, or at least you can send a much higher volume of that signal than you would be able to if the exercise was much higher intensity. So again, essentially all you're doing is you are taking the painful movement, which is knee extension, straightening the knee. You are regressing that down to a point that is tolerable, and then you're just rebuilding that back up as your pain allows. And then from there, your goal is just to progress one aspect of the exercise at a time. So if you want to progress the load or the weight that your knees have to do during this specific exercise, you could use a sled where you're backwards walking against a sled, or just go on an incline so there's a bit more of a downward angulation. You could progress the range of motion, which I don't have it written here, but you could just take longer steps when you're doing your backwards walking, or you could progress to a Stairmaster, and then once that is very tolerable, you can progress to doing double stairs, like stepping over one step at a time, or two steps at a time rather. You could progress the volume of the exercise, so you keep everything about it the same, but if in one session you do 10 minutes, the next one you do 15 minutes. Or you could introduce different types of muscle contractions. Specific example, that could just be doing step-ups with a shallow step and then progressing the range of motion from there. Now, there's no right answer to which one you pick here. And which one is the most productive to start with is really going to depend on what your specific situation is. But again, the basic principle that we're following here is we're taking the exercise that is painful, we are regressing it down to a point that's tolerable, and then just slowly building that back up one component at a time until you're back at normal function. So again, this is not medical advice. This is just my interpretation of why backwards walking or anything similar tends to be helpful for knee pain. Hopefully you found that somewhat helpful, interesting, or somewhere between. If you have any comments, questions, concerns about anything I said, don't hesitate to comment down below. And if nothing else, I will speak to you next time.